Here's something that makes absolutely no sense. Each year, tens of billions of dollars worth of cargo moves through a hidden corridor that's over 65 years old, past its design life and showing serious signs of failure. This waterway supports over $50 billion in economic activity across the Canadian and American economies, connects 8 US states and 2 Canadian provinces to global markets, and sustains over 200,000 jobs. Yet, Canada spends only about $115 million a year on its side to keep it running, barely a fraction of the trade value it enables. Meanwhile, behind-the-scenes studies have identified $5 to $8 billion in cracking concrete and corroding systems that need to be addressed over the next 20 years. This is the St. Lawrence Seaway. And it's not just aging, it's becoming a critical point of vulnerability for Canada's entire industrial heartland. So why hasn't Canada invested in fixing it? And what happens if this 3,700-kilometer waterway suffers a major long-term disruption? This is the story of why Canada can't afford to let the St. Lawrence Seaway fail. To understand why this seaway matters so much, you need to understand the geographic problem it solves. The Great Lakes contain 20% of the world's fresh surface water. They sit in the middle of one of the most productive regions on the planet. The mineral-rich lands around Lake Superior, the industrial belt of Ontario, and the US Midwest, and some of the continent's most important farming regions. But for centuries, there was a fundamental problem. The Great Lakes were landlocked. The geography was a logistical nightmare. Lake Superior sits 183 meters above sea level, while the Atlantic Ocean is at sea level. Between them lie the Lachine Rapids, the Thousand Islands, and the massive 51-meter drop of Niagara Falls. For early explorers and traders, this wasn't just a challenge, it was a wall. Before the Seaway, cargo had to be unloaded, moved by rail or small boats around these obstacles, and reloaded multiple times. Each transfer added cost, time, and risk. This made Great Lakes industries less competitive on the global stage. So, in 1954, Canada and the United States began construction on a solution, a 3,700-kilometer staircase of water. The project took 5 years and cost approximately $4.5 billion in today's money. It required building 7 new locks, deepening channels to 8.2 meters, and even relocating entire communities. It was one of the most ambitious engineering feats of the 20th century. The locks work like water elevators. A ship enters, gates close, and water is pumped in or out to lift or lower the vessel to the next level. It's a silent, mechanical dance that allows massive ocean-going ships to climb the continent. When the Seaway opened in 1959, it fundamentally altered North American trade. For the first time, a ship could travel from the Atlantic all the way to Duluth, Minnesota. Today, the Seaway moves approximately 40 million metric tons of cargo annually, including iron ore, grain, steel, and salt. The economic impact is over $50 billion in annual trade. However, what makes this critical is that the Seaway doesn't just move cargo. It makes entire industries viable by solving the geographic problem of landlocked resources. Now, to understand why a failure would be catastrophic, you have to look at what actually depends on this waterway. This isn't just a shipping lane, it is the quiet backbone of the Great Lakes economy. First, steel production. The Great Lakes industry runs on bulk inputs, iron ore and coal. Water is usually the cheapest way to move that kind of weight at scale. In 2024, Seaway traffic included about 5.1 million metric tons of iron ore and 1.9 million tons of coal, plus major volumes of iron and steel products. And here's the key point. One widely cited estimate puts freight costs around $0.01 per ton-mile by barge versus $0.04 per ton-mile by rail, meaning rail can be multiple times more expensive for the same tonnage. If Seaway capacity is disrupted, more volume gets forced onto rail and truck networks, delivery costs rise, and steel-linked manufacturing loses its competitiveness. Second, agriculture. In 2024, the Seaway moved about 11.8 million metric tons of grain. The geography tells the story. Picture a load of grain leaving the prairies, say, from around Saskatoon. It travels roughly 1,497 kilometers overland to Thunder Bay, where it can discharge into the Great Lakes St. Lawrence system. From there, the ocean leg to a major European hub like Rotterdam is about 3,226 nautical miles from Montreal. But if that same cargo is pushed out of the West Coast and sent to Rotterdam via the Panama Canal, a commonly cited distance is about 8,850 nautical miles. That's an extra 5,624 nautical miles, about 10,400 kilometers of additional ocean sailing. And that distance doesn't just look big on a map. It can mean more time, more fuel, and higher freight costs, which often show up in the price farmers ultimately net, depending on rates and market conditions. Third, mining. Bulk commodities live or die on transport economics. Northern Ontario and Quebec produce metals where pennies per ton matter. Direct mining employment is often cited at approximately 22,000 jobs in Ontario and approximately 15,500 in Quebec, with larger totals once indirect jobs are included. If marine shipping becomes less reliable or more constrained, costs rise, and marginal projects become harder to justify, especially in remote regions. Fourth, manufacturing. Ontario's manufacturing base is huge, about 787,100 jobs and roughly 11% of provincial GDP. Manufacturers rely on Great Lakes Seaway ports for heavy inputs and bulk outputs, metals, industrial materials, and machinery. When upstream transport costs rise, downstream margins get squeezed. And there's another piece most people overlook: power. The Moses Saunders complex includes two major stations: Ontario's R.H. Saunders, 1,045 megawatts, and New York's St. Lawrence FDR project, 912 megawatts, nearly 2,000 megawatts combined. OPG notes: Saunders alone can power more than 800,000 homes. So what's the scale of the economic footprint? Depending on the scope, published impact figures commonly cite about 241,286 jobs supported on one measure and 356,858 jobs on a broader measure. Either way, this isn't just shipping. It's a supply chain spine for the Great Lakes region. And it all sits on infrastructure that opened in 1959, meaning it's now well over 65 years old and has to be managed like the critical system it is. Now let's talk about the problem that keeps engineers awake at night. The St. Lawrence Seaway is a 15-lock system between Montreal and Lake Erie. The Montreal to Lake Ontario section was built in 1959 and includes 5 Canadian and 2 US locks. The Welland Canal, the Niagara Bypass, was built between 1913 and 1932, opened in 1932, and includes 8 Canadian locks. Here's the issue: the Seaway's lock structures were built with an original 50-year design life. That design life has already been reached and exceeded. So the newest locks are now about 66 to 67 years old, and the Welland Canal locks are about 94 years old. And these aren't small parts. Lock gates are massive steel structures, hundreds of tons, cycling again and again through the navigation season. Even Seaway documents note that key operating machinery can be more than 50 years old and requires upgrading. Then there's the environment. Months of freezing temperatures, ice and freeze-thaw cycles that work cracks open, stress concrete, and accelerate wear year after year. On the Canadian side, the Seaway is operated and maintained by the SLSMC under an agreement where Ottawa covers net requirements. $115.3 million is the 2025 to 26 forecast statutory payment, driven by maintaining, repairing, and replacing Seaway assets. But the bigger point is this: the Seaway is a single lock system. There's no parallel backup. One serious failure can ripple across the whole corridor, and we've seen what that looks like before. In 1985, a Welland Canal lock wall failure trapped 53 vessels for 24 days, costing shippers over $24 million, about $54 million in 2017 dollars. Even non-structural shutdowns show the scale of the pain. During the 2023 Seaway strike, losses were estimated as high as $100 million per day. That's why this is a time bomb. The Seaway supports $46.8 billion in economic activity across Canada and the US, and it's running on infrastructure that's already beyond its original design life. As assets age past design life, risk rises, and every year you delay major renewal, you're betting the economy won't get unlucky at the worst possible time. So what happens if Canada doesn't invest? The consequences go far beyond shipping delays. First, there are no good alternatives. If prairie grain headed for Europe gets pushed away from the Great Lakes route, the geography gets brutal fast. From the St. Lawrence side, the ocean leg from Montreal to Rotterdam is about 3,226 nautical miles. From the west coast, Vancouver to Rotterdam via the Panama Canal is commonly sited at about 8,850 nautical miles. Roughly 5,600 extra nautical miles, about 10,400 kilometers of ocean sailing. Rail to the west coast and rail to Atlantic ports also run into capacity and congestion constraints, depending on the year and corridor. And truck transport is completely uneconomical for bulk commodities. The cost difference is stark. A commonly cited freight comparison puts average costs around $0.01 per ton-mile by water, versus about $0.04 by rail and $0.12 by truck. For heavy bulk, forcing volumes off water and onto land modes is where costs explode. And remember the scale. In 2024, the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway system moved about 37 million metric tons of cargo. If a major chunk of that gets forced onto rail, the added cost isn't a little higher. It can be hundreds of millions to over $1 billion per year in extra line haul costs alone, depending on distance, before you even count congestion, delays, and knock-on supply chain disruption. That gets passed through as higher prices for steel, grain, and manufactured goods. Canadian manufacturing becomes less competitive globally. Companies cut production, shift investment, or relocate. Jobs disappear. And we've seen a real-world preview of the disruption risk. During the 2023 Seaway strike, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce said about 34 million Canadian dollars per day in economic activity was being disrupted, while industry groups warned the wider ripple effects could be far higher once supply chains seize up. The impact hits communities hard. Thunder Bay is a major grain gateway. Port and industrial cities along the corridor, places like Hamilton, Oshawa, and communities in eastern Ontario and Quebec have activity built around Great Lakes shipping. Mining and industrial supply chains across the region rely on those routes. When the corridor breaks, the pain concentrates in places that don't have easy substitutes. Second, there's the geopolitical dimension. The Seaway is a binational system and a symbol of US-Canada cooperation. If Canada can't keep its side reliable, it doesn't just create delays. It creates friction with the country that sits at the center of Canada's trade. Third, global competitiveness. China's Belt and Road-linked infrastructure engagement has surpassed $1 trillion. Europe has an active plan to boost and modernize inland waterway freight. And the United States is spending heavily to upgrade inland navigation choke points, like the Upper Mississippi Lock modernization under NESP. If Canada lets the Seaway deteriorate while competitors invest, Canadian industries lose ground. Trade shifts to other routes. Economic activity moves elsewhere. And here's the irony. Climate change might actually increase the Seaway's value. Warmer conditions can widen the window for safe navigation in some years. And in fact, the 2024 navigation season lasted 295 days, one of the longest planned seasons. Longer seasons mean more shipping opportunities, but only if the infrastructure is reliable enough to use them. The math is straightforward. On the broad binational measure, Seaway-linked activity is commonly estimated at roughly $50.9 billion in annual economic activity, supporting 356,858 jobs. When the backbone is that valuable, allowing it to decay is the expensive option. So here's the brutal truth about the St. Lawrence Seaway. It's not strained because of bad engineering. It's strained because major renewal hasn't kept pace with age and risk. This waterway solved a fundamental geographic problem, connecting the landlocked Great Lakes to global markets. Since 1959, it has linked the Great Lakes industrial heartland to the Atlantic and overseas trade for more than 65 years. And on one widely cited measure, commerce transiting the Seaway waterway and lock system supports about 356,858 jobs and $50.9 billion in economic activity. But infrastructure doesn't last forever. The Seaway is now well beyond the typical approximately 50-year design life often used for lock assets, and aging components raise the likelihood of unplanned outages. The reinvestment required is multi-billion-dollar. Recent surveys estimate $8.4 billion has been or is committed for Great Lakes/Seaway infrastructure investments over 2018 to 2027 alone. And the cost of failure stacks up fast. During the 2023 shutdown, estimates ranged from about $34 million per day in disrupted activity, Canada, to up to $100 million per day across Canada and the US. A longer closure doesn't just mean delays. It can quickly mean billions in losses, major supply disruptions, and job risk across the Great Lakes economy. Geography gave Canada an incredible advantage: access to the Great Lakes system and the engineering capability to connect it to the world. The Seaway is how Canada capitalizes on that advantage. But geographic advantages only matter if you maintain the infrastructure that makes them accessible. The question isn't whether Canada can afford to fix the Seaway. The question is whether Canada can afford not to. The Seaway isn't just a shipping route, it's a supply chain spine for central Canada, and Canada can't afford to let it fail. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Should Canada invest billions to keep the Seaway reliable, or are there better alternatives? If this changed how you see Canada's infrastructure challenges, hit like and subscribe. We have more stories about how geography and infrastructure shape economic power coming up.